So what you see happening is instead of simply having individual cells as organization, and complexity proceeded, cells started to communicate with one another. And you had a ball of cells, peripheral, the sponges, not very sophisticated. They are the most primitive multicellular organisms. And what they had associated with them were the beginnings of what would be necessary. If you think about it, you got to be able to monitor what's coming into and out of the system in order for the system to function better and to adapt to the changing environment as these cells floated through, the oceans or wherever they were, right? So now you had a ball of cells that had primitive communication, not really any sophistication. And the next layer of change, there was an indent in the ball of the cells. So you had now some layer of specialization for increasing the flow, because it's all about the flow. And that indent was an anus and a mouth. So now you had the beginnings of a digestive system and an excretory system. All right, so now with that in mind, let's revisit the immune system and the nervous system. Well, let's wait till we get there. Let's move a little further. So the next stage of development evolutionarily was for that indent to actually become the tube. All right, and that tube, as we've said, can form either ass first or butt first. And our whole lineage is butt first. So now we see this bifurcation again occurring where, the system freaks out because of the energy flow. It reaches a critical point and all of the variables, the intensive variables of the system approach infinity, and pop, something new occurs. Well, that was the development of our lineage, the vertebrates. And what we see in those vertebrates is a collection of organisms that is best able to survive by themselves changing. So their system is not as static, and they embrace change. So if you look at humanity, that's what we're about. We're about change. We've developed a hypervariable interface, our mind and our immune system, that allows us, in both of those cases, what they're doing is they're monitoring the mass that comes into the system, us being the system, okay? So the mass is what's being monitored by the immune system. So for example, your gut is loaded with immune cells. And the other way that mass comes into our system is you get an insect bite or a viral infection. Now mass is coming into us. So that's all monitored by the immune system. Whereas the other things that come into us are energy in the form of sight, sounds, temperature, all of our body senses. In other words, our nervous system is monitoring the energy that comes in. The immune system is monitoring the mass that comes in. Our digestive system and excretory system are providing the resources, essentially. And our endocrine system coordinates what's going on. So we have, a nice thermodynamic interpretation. And what we really can see occurring is the continued increase in how the system deals with change. And change is stress. Okay? So you have a system, everything's flowing harmoniously and nicely, and all of a sudden you change it, and now the system has to readapt. Well, that's stress. And the fact that we are organisms that survive by what's called redox reactions, where we take in reduced hydrocarbons, our food, we burn them in a controlled fashion, not with a flame, but with the enzymes of our body systems, of our cellular systems, that allow for us to recapture the energy, recapture the mass, and use it to continuously create newness within us. We're always getting rid of our old cells, replacing them with new cells. There's flow through all of the cells. Everything's coordinated so that us as flow-dependent structures are optimally able to interface with our changing environment. We don't have to sit around. But part of that distance from equilibrium has given us the capacity to be predictive, so that we don't have to float around in the sewer water to wait for the next flush for a meal like a bacteria. We actually can be smart enough to plant our crops and create stores and create currents and create a social structure that is so far advanced beyond the beehive or the ants, because they are rigid and we are hypervariable.
Mm.
And it turns out, from my understanding and knowledge, that the big thing that allowed that to happen is our endocannabinoid system. It's quite miraculous, because we now know, as we've known for pretty much thousands of years, is that this marijuana plant has the capacity to touch basically our biochemical soul, you know, the thing that's regulating everything in us.
Yeah.
And there's, a lot of consequences to all of this, as I've talked about in some of my videos, etc. The whole blip flip story, backwards looking people, forwards looking people, that all ties into whether you're cannabinoid endowed and can embrace change in a minimally stressful environment, and therefore you're optimistic and you're ready to go and deal with change, versus the blips, the backward looking people, sort of flips versus the blips. The backward looking people, they're not cannabinoid endowed enough, so change is a stress to them.
Yeah.
That they don't embrace because they don't have the biochemical machinery. So what they want for the future is they're more insect-like. They want it all rigid. These are the rule makers. These are the paranoid lunatics that are out there, telling us marijuana is a dangerous, deadly drug, rather than understanding through science as well as people that it's an anti-aging drug that kills cancer.
Right.
So, it's this battle. Everything always oscillates. That's the way the physics works out, so that everything is like thermostats. And part of the physics is that the flowing biochemistry actually creates the thermostats and actually creates the settings. We call these limit cycles. And how they oscillate either in ordered pattern or in highly complicated patterns called deterministic chaos. That's what we are made out of. And it's how we interface with this changing environment through our immune system and our nervous system that gives us the capacity to continue to grow, to make ourselves healthier and move ourselves further from equilibrium. Because the movement to equilibrium is death, which is a phase change that randomizes us. And, we don't go back to equilibrium because we get recycled back into the flow of the biosphere. But we take a step closer to equilibrium by going through the phase change of life to death. So that's pretty much what I think is going on. And I think that we're at a point in man's evolutionary history where, if you look back, with the exception, I couldn't think of any exceptions, but somebody pointed out there was one, Gandhi. If you look back at the history of power of mankind, it's not a very pretty picture, Genghis Khan to Adolf Hitler, George Bush, Cheney, These people are cannabinoid defective. They're aggressive. They're
Yanging
tunnel
out.
vision.
They're
They
yanging out.
accomplish power because of their single-minded determination.
Right.
And there was a point where that was probably very advantageous in man's evolution because it fostered us to organize, to be able to create the social structures that we now enjoy. But now, because of man's impact on the environment, we're going to create an environment that's no longer going to be able to sustain us.
Yeah.
And therefore, we've got to change our modus operandi and replace the blips that have naturally come into power because of their vision of the past that they want to be the future. They have consensus. And they tend to be aggressive. They're the unhigh people. They're the insects. And they're the ones who run our world and our country. And they can't take in information like on mankind's impact on our environment, our pollution, be it chemical, thermal, or whatever, and create policies that are going to promote sustained futures for our species.
Yeah.
So what we need now is a revolution in consciousness, whereby the flips, the forward-leaping people, the cannabinoid-endowed people take over. And I think what's going to drive that is the whole medical marijuana movement, because what we're realizing is that the bulk of our age-related illnesses can best be addressed not by going to the pharmaceutical company and taking toxins and then taking toxins to correct the toxic effects of the toxins, but rather to use this cannabis plant that plugs into our biochemical system in such a unique way. Again, one of the fundamental concepts of this far from equilibrium thermodynamics is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So what we've got to be able to do now, as a result of our individual needs to improve our health through cannabis, is to create a novel society by having a bunch more people elevating their cannabinoid levels, so that we shift the thermostat setting for things like aggression and narrow-mindedness into one of cooperativity and forward progressive movement, which requires more cannabinoid activity. And if you look back, there's an interesting little story here that kind of supports this whole philosophy.